to Speak Sex. I am your host, Eurydice. I am a Greek from the island of Lesbos, um, which I think makes me a rebel in patriarchy by definition. And it also made me very aware from basically birth of the power of words and names and patriarchies, especially words and names. Because they affected my understanding of myself. So this is one of the reasons I am now working as the host of this podcast. It was my response to the Me Too movement, and I felt very strongly that this was our time where we could, take the power of consent that we were given finally as women for the first time in recorded history, and win our genetic advantage back through it. My feeling is that the only way to end the patriarchy is for women to own sex. So that's my project, and today's guest is one of my favorite female artists of all time. And she's also a fellow Greek. I don't think many people know that. But anyway, Simrit. Yes, Simrit Kaur Khalsa, right?
Yes, that is right.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm, as I said, a huge fan of your work. And what I admire most about your music, besides the fact that it's global, that it combines sounds from around the world and overcomes borders and boundaries and all that, is that to me it's prelingual and postlingual, right? So it frees us from the limitations of language, which I think that the language we all use is very male, and it's kind of created for us to follow the rules that perpetuate the system that we live in, which I call patriarchy, but we can call it by any name of the dominant culture, whatever you want to call it. It could be Western Judeo-Christian civilization, it could be late capitalism, people can put their own name for it. But I really feel that your music speaks to my greater consciousness and my subconscious both. So, and I'm very moved by it. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for your work, first of all, and for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your journey, which is pretty extraordinary. So I think that your, heroine's journey is pretty mythic, because you are a fellow Greek and you somehow got from Greece to the American South and then to Kundalini yoga and your teachings of Yogi Bhajan.
Yes.
And this music that embraces all of these lineages.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was born in Athens, in the big city of Athens. It's a beautiful city, and I go back every year. I was born there, and I lived there for almost 2 years. And I was orphaned, so I lived in an orphanage, and I lived with a foster family as well. So most of the time I lived with a foster family when I was young. I don't remember much of it. I do remember little bits and pieces, but not much of it. My mother, who I just recently met in Athens last year. Yeah, I met her. She's only 16 years older than me. So she had me when she was 16, and she at the time was touring around and singing all over Greece, including the island of Crete and all the different islands. And so she was singing and wanted to she was touring while she was pregnant with me, and she wanted to keep me, but her family her mother was also very young.
I'm sorry to interrupt. She was singing what, like folk music or
traditional
love songs?
Greek folk music. Traditional Greek folk music she sings.
So not the Rebetika, but the older music.
She also sings Rebetika, yes. She's also, and I have a grandmother who also sang, or a great-grandmother who also sang Rebetika, but she was also an actress and a well-known actress and singer. She would do, like, I guess, Broadway style, I don't know if it was Broadway. It's not like Broadway here, but she would sing and dance in these shows that they would have. And her name was Tula Dimitriou.
Tula Dimitriou, right. I
think it's like that was her stage name.
Right. I think it's like the Greek cabaret. I mean, it's not
it was like,
American cabaret.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely. Yeah, it was something like that. And she was very she was very known and she was very respected. She had a beautiful voice, and I never got to meet her. She passed before I got to meet my biological mother. So she passed a couple of years before that. So, and all of the women in my biological lineage were very young when they had their children. So they were all teenagers, and I broke that. I didn't do that. I didn't have a baby when I was a teenager. So, so my parents, who were also full Greek, who came to adopt me, and they also adopted my brother from Greece, who was from a completely different Greek family. And they first adopted my brother, and then they adopted me a couple of years later. And my brother has special needs, so they adopted him with special needs. And both of my parents come from immigrant parents from Greece. So both of my parents were first-generation Greeks, and they grew up, in the restaurant business and the bar business and in the furniture business.
The Greek diner.
Oh, yeah. So they grew up with immigrant parents, and then they raised us in a very, very rich Greek culture. So we learned, we learned how to cook and dance and read and write and speak. And we grew up in the church, and I studied the ancient Byzantine music in the church. And I mean, it was a study of mine for many years. I had a teacher there. The choir teacher was very adamant about teaching me because
Byzantine
she recognized.
Music.
Yeah, she recognized my gift as a little girl, and she wanted to teach me. And so I was singing in the choir when I was in grade school, when I was very young, and I was learning the Greek hymns, and then I was also learning the Byzantine hymns. They're very ancient, It was such a practice, and it was beautiful. And whenever I would sing in the church, I would get this same feeling that I get when I sing now. I got this like out-of-body experience, very emotional, very beautiful, very connected, very, I would go into like a different realm, into a different world.
Yeah, and it's a devotional practice, which is
yes, very much so, very much so. But at the time, I didn't know what was going on, but she recognized that in me, and then other people also would feel that when I would sing, so she really wanted to help me cultivate that. So I was in the choir for a long time, and my parents were very supportive of my musical talents from the time I was very young. They got me into piano and drums and singing, and I was the whole while I was playing basketball and Greek dancing. I was learning Greek dances with a teacher from the Dora Stratu dance company from Athens.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was like a really big deal. My parents were very they were very encouraging of my brother and me learning in the arts. So I'm really grateful to them because none of this would have happened without them,
And I also think that, we Greeks, even those who aren't educated in the sense of who will not articulate this, we have like a much bigger, more mythic sense of time because, our history starts like 3,000 years ago and our music, like the Byzantine church music, is the continuation of like the ancient music and the ancient songs. And
yes.
So I think
definitely.
we have like kind of like an uninterrupted tunnel sense of time, which is very unlike the American linear time, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense because I feel our ancestry in my blood. And I feel that when I'm singing, I'm pulling that through. Naturally, it's coming through. There's no like time and space happening. It's very ancient what comes through me, and it feels that way. But it's also relevant, you know, for this time. But but there's also there is that. You're right. I absolutely feel that. And the Greek culture before Christianity came was not a patriarchal culture. It was very different. It was we had a god and goddess veneration culture, and goddesses were very much venerated, especially on islands like Crete. And you know, and then there's of course, the Oracle of Delphi and everything like that. So Delphi, it's just we have it in our culture. It's so ingrained in us, in our DNA. I don't think we can escape it.
No,
we can't.
It's so ingrained. I mean, my mom's a cantor in church, right? My whole life.
Your mom is a cantor.
Yeah,
wow.
Her father was a priest, and her grandma was the village medicine woman. You know, she would do like the herbs and the blessings and the, take care of, like, if the crops were drying, or if the kids had illness, or if you couldn't sleep, or if you were infertile. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it continues. And I just feel like because we're so close to our past, it just comes down through the generations. Yeah, very much alive.
Indeed. Well, it's
so I do hear it in your music, and
oh yeah,
the past, the ancient past, and the present, both.
Yes, I'm really glad that you, and I'm not surprised that you notice it being from Greece yourself, and really feeling that ancient mystical vibe, because that's what the culture is. The ancient Greek culture is very mystical, and it has a very it's just got a very strong influence on my melodic sensibilities. I grew up listening to Greek music all day, every day, and I used to listen to old traditional Greek music. That's what my parents played all the time. I mean, they played other stuff too, but we would dance even in the house. I studied Greek dancing for 12 years, but even with that, even studying Greek dancing for 12 years, and the different dances from the islands, and the different dances that when the Turks invaded Greece, that some of the women would do, and they would dance off the cliff. And I mean, we studied all of these different kinds of dances that had so much significance to our culture and our heritage.
Yeah.
Yes, really strong women, and even with, listening to that, and I would listen to lots of course, American music too, now and then growing up. And then as I became a teenager, I started diving into a lot more American music. And of course, I've never ever dropped the Greek music. It's always been a huge part of my life, and still is. And the melodic sensibilities of growing up and studying the ancient music that I would sing in the church, and then also the traditional Greek folk music, definitely has an influence on the way that I write. 100% has an influence on it, and I don't even try to escape it. It's just the minor chords that in my music, and the way that I write, the way that I write, the chord progressions even. I mean, it's very, like you said, you really recognize it. There's something in it that just you feel, and it's it definitely comes from that. And
there is something of the psalm in it,
There's what?
The psalm, Psalm.
Ah, yes, definitely. Yeah.
So you were growing up. Where were you? What's your hometown?
I grew up in a small little town called Camden, South Carolina, and it was the hub of the Civil War. So for the United States, so it was a small Civil War town, very southern. We were very ethnic in that town. There was no other ethnic people. If there were, we didn't see them. There was 2 other Greek families there, and that's it. I mean, it was very small, 5,000 people. So, we were fine. We grew up with beautiful parents, and we had everything we needed. But the cultural gap there with us and then the friends from school was very apparent. And then we moved to the city when we were in middle school. We moved to Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital of South Carolina. And the reason we lived in South Carolina is because my father's family immigrated from Tripoli, and they came to South Carolina out of all places to open up a restaurant and a furniture store. I don't know why they came there, but my dad told the story that his grandfather immigrated to Ellis Island and got on I don't know how he got down to South Carolina, but for some reason he was traveling down to find his brother Spiro that had come before him, and they didn't have phones, or they didn't have phone numbers or anything, like they didn't have any way to get in touch with each other, and he was organically led to South Carolina to find his brother. And so somehow he found his brother in this little small town. And the reason they wanted to stay there in Camden was because they felt it was like the New York City of the South, because there was a lot of similarities. There were a lot of similarities at that time with Camden and in New York, the way that the women were dressed really stylishly, and the horse and buggies around all the fountains and all these beautiful things. So my father said that his father and his uncle Spiro decided to stay because of that. They really liked it, and they ended up raising their family there, and that's where my dad was born, actually. My father, my adopted father, of course, but still, but when I reference my mother and father, they're my real parents. They raised me for most of my life. So, so it was that's where we were brought to from Greece, and we stayed there for almost 12 years. Well, for me, it would have been almost 10 years, because I was close to being 12 when we moved, and I didn't get there till I was just before I was 2. So it was close to my 12th year of life when we moved to the big city of Columbia. The bigger city. It's still not a big city. It's like 600,000 people. It's not that big, but it's a small city, And when we moved to the city, that's where the Greek church was, so we didn't have to drive as far to go to church 3 days a week, which was tough when we were growing up. It was a good hour from our home growing up, and so we would drive 3 days a week to the church.
Wow.
So we were driving a lot, when we were in the small town. And then when we moved to the city, it cut the drive in half, so that was really nice. But so that's where.
So from the big city, you stayed there until college?
I did. I stayed there until I went to college, and I ended up going to College of Charleston, which was about an hour and a half due east of Columbia. And that it's a beautiful beach college, and Charleston has a beautiful beach. And I basically lived there for about 8 years of my life, and I loved it. I would say it was one of the best times of my life, because I didn't have a college experience where I wasn't in a sorority or anything like that. I was very into music, and I was very into the mystic arts, and I would study with teachers at the college that taught those kinds of arts. So I would study shamanism and study music and study this and that, and I studied different writers that I was really into and things like that. So it was a really beautiful college experience. I played a lot of music. I studied African drums. At that point, I was already playing doumbek a little bit, but I wanted to really get into African drumming. So I started studying African drumming. That's when I was in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was a beautiful time, really. I had some beautiful friends there, and we lived right on the beach. It was just a beautiful, relaxing, and deepening time. It wasn't like all we did was go party. We would have like drum circles on the beach. That would be our party. Or we would gather around and eat food at somebody's house and then go play drums for like 4 hours, or go to the African drumming music festivals, or it was a very enriching time of my life.
And is that where you discovered Kundalini yoga, or not yet?
It was, yes. When I was 19, I started practicing Hatha yoga first and Reiki, and I became really into Reiki, and I had a Reiki teacher in Charleston, and she had a big center where she would have clients come, and we would practice Reiki with the clients, and that happened once a week or sometimes twice a week. And so I really got into that, and I was taking Hatha yoga classes because the first year of college I was just trying to figure it all out, and I would, like any other college freshman, you go to parties, you're like, oh, do I like this or that? And it really wasn't speaking to me, the whole party scene and stuff like that. And I wanted a deeper experience of myself. So I turned to yoga and meditation at a pretty young age. And at 19, I stopped, trying to hang out with people, or stopped hanging out with people that weren't truly into the things that I was into, and they were just really into partying and stuff like that. So it was a pretty young age to do that, and I started really on my path of yoga at that age. And after a year of doing Hatha yoga, I kind of felt like I was at a plateau with it, not because Hatha yoga is limited. It's not. There's lifetimes upon lifetimes of experience that you can gain from it. But obviously it just wasn't for me, and I was searching for something else. And then I found Kundalini yoga. I went to my first class, and then within the first 3 minutes of that class, I had this recognizing, I recognized it, I basically had a recognition that I had a very strong familiarity with this path, and not only that, but that I would be doing it for the rest of my life. I knew that within the first 3 minutes of the class.
I had the same experience. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had the exact same experience. I did yoga for so long, and I loved it, and I felt like it suited me, physically at least. And I started it when I went to India, in my 20s at the Osho ashram. So I did every type of yoga. I got certified to teach, whatever. But when I discovered the Kundalini within, as you said, it was not even, it was before the class was over, that first class.
Yeah, it was instantly, thought,
right. This is what I do. I felt like this is what I do in my life and don't know it, and I don't have a system for it or a name for it, but that's how my body naturally functions, only now it's enhanced, right?
Yes.
It's just so, I don't know, natural. It's just such an amazing way of practicing.
It's so natural.
Yeah.
Yes, and I will tell you, when I first heard some of the music in the class, I heard it, and it was so beautiful to me, even though it wasn't necessarily the style that I play in, but I thought these chants feel so familiar to me. It feels like what I grew up with. You know what I'm saying? It felt so familiar to me, and I'm sure it felt like that to you because of your mom being, she chanted in the church, so it was like, it was like,
and
this is
looks
no
like
different
my
than
grandpa.
what I was doing.
I think that Yogi Bhajan looks just like my grandpa. I have his photo in front of me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
Well, when I heard the music in that first class, the first thing I thought was, I have something to contribute. Because this is really nice, and the music was really beautiful and important to me when I heard it. But I said, I have something with this that's really, I need to really bring through, because I have something that's going to really take this further and really I just knew that I needed to start creating some kind of music with it, and I didn't for a long time. But yeah, it's so familiar. The chanting, when people are like, was it weird when you started chanting? I was like, no, I've been chanting my whole life in the Greek church. It's the same thing, you know? It's the same. They're really the same. And
I think it's like equally ancient, you know, and the other yoga types, they're a little more rigid, you know, you have to hold the pose. There's much less chanting, you know, organically.
Yes.
I mean, now there is in the American way of practicing it because people play music, but not so much in the original way, you know, that the poses are held. Yeah, I do think that, and for all we know, you know, Alexander went to India. I mean, who knows where they all met?
We do know that there is, the history tells us, and the DNA tests tell us that the Greeks and the Indians share DNA.
Right.
Especially because Alexander the Great, when he went over there, he left some of his generals over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were, you know, having children with the Indian women. And so and that was in the northeast corner of India, which is where Yogi Bhajan, who brought Kundalini Yoga to the West, is from. He's from that area.
Jacobs.
So there is, you know, maybe that's what I'm feeling in it. I don't know, but there are a lot of Indians that have also have Greek DNA as well in the Punjab, which is the northwestern corner of India.
Exactly.
And that comes from a long time ago, you know, when you said Alexander went over there. And I think that's really neat that we're also connected like that, you know.
Yeah, he was known as Sikandar, and there is a lot of, you know, storytelling and mythology that's come down through the generations about him. So I do think that there was a, you know, cultural meld at that time.
Yes.
And it passed to both sides, you know, because the people, you know, all these people who went with him and then came back to Greece brought something for sure as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And
so when did you bring everything out?
When did I start putting my music out?
Yeah, when did it all come together and you were like, oh, I have this voice?
Well, when I was young, my parents said I had a voice. But when you're young and you're a kid, you don't think about it that way. You know, you're just doing your thing and you do what you love. But they said I always would sing. And you know, when I was really little, when I was in grade school, I do remember coming home after school, and we had these tape recorders back then. We didn't have our iPhones that we could record on like we do now. But I would go home and sit in a corner in the house and record songs with my voice, like songs, like any songs. Like I would sing, I'm going to school, you know, and make these melodies up, you know, with these funny words. But I was doing that even back then, and I didn't realize what I was doing. I was doing it because it was something fun. I never had a dream that I was going to be a singer and, you know, travel the world and have audiences all over the world. I never had that dream. I always thought I was going to be, you know, when I was younger, like a doctor, like a healer in that way. And my father would always... Yes, it is healing, and definitely I was tuned into the healer part, but not the singer part. And even though I was already singing so much when I was a child, and then when I got into high school, I started taking singing lessons at the University of South Carolina with my previous piano teacher. So I was taking professional singing lessons as a teenager, and still at that point, I wasn't thinking I was going to be a singer. You know, I wasn't, you know, I was still focused on potentially being a doctor. Because my father, you know how Greek fathers are, they want their children, they want to be so proud of their children. And my father would always tell me, oh, you have long fingers, you're going to be a doctor, you know? And he said, your fingers are so long, and this is because you're meant to be a doctor. So I adopted that. What?
Long fingers should be for the piano.
Well, I did. I played piano.
Right.
But so they had me in piano lessons and everything like that. But, you know, my father, you know, coming from an immigrant family and not having much money growing up, they wanted to be proud of their doctor daughter that made this much money, and you know what I mean, that made it in America. So yeah, he was always talking with me like that, kind of like ingraining that in my head, and I took that on for a while. But I always knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor. I wanted to be a naturopath. I always knew that was more of my style, and so up through college, I studied to be a naturopath. I got degrees in first, I got a degree in anthropology. Second, I got a minor in Spanish, and then after that, I went back to school to get my degree in science to go to naturopathic school because I was going to really be a naturopathic doctor. I was serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in college, I was a musician. I was playing music. I was singing. I was studying voice. I was studying Middle Eastern voice. I was studying African drums. I was studying Western vocals. I mean, I was studying like I was getting ready to go out and be a singer, but yet I was going to school after that to be a naturopath. So it was really interesting how it all happened, because it really wasn't until that first Kundalini yoga class that I even thought about bringing music out into the world. And then even after that, it took me, I would say, 10 years after that first Kundalini yoga class to actually start recording, to actually do something with the music.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first initially recorded, after 10 years after I was saying that I started doing Kundalini yoga, when I initially recorded, I wasn't even trying to market myself and put myself out there. I was just doing it for the Kundalini yoga community.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't going to tour or anything. And same with the second album I did. I wasn't going to tour. I was just putting it out for the community, so I didn't market. I didn't do anything like that. I never put myself out for the first 3 years that I had recorded. So isn't that interesting? I didn't put my music online, and that's when the online music scene was starting to really
take off,
kind of take hold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I still at that point was like, oh, we have a son. We just had a little, baby when I put my first album out, and I just wanted to be at home with him.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to be a singer that was sharing music all over the world. So, anyways, it was really interesting how
and
sort
you
of
always recorded
organically.
with your Kundalini name.
I did.
Okay.
I got, so my birth name, or the name that my parents gave me, it was Stavrula, Stephanie, and they translated to Stephanie.
I know, but Stavrula really means of the cross,
Right, it does.
Which is very powerful.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And it comes from, my mother wanted to give me that name because her father's name was Stavros.
Stavros, right.
So,
yeah, we all do that.
Yeah,
I have my grandma's name and her grandma's name. My daughter has my mother's name. And yeah, it's actually,
I
nice
love
that we have.
I love this
Me
name.
too,
And some of my family calls me Stavrula. And, some of my friends call me Stavrula.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my, my husband knows that name, and he only calls me that every once in a while. It's really sweet. But, and I went by Stephanie a lot growing up, in the States. But my family and Greek friends would always call me Stavrula, which I really loved. But a lot of the people in the schools, when I was coming as Stavrula, they couldn't pronounce it. It was too much for them. So eventually we just said, okay, well, also we just, it's Stephanie, Stephanie. So, and then I got a name when I was practicing Kundalini yoga for a few years. Finally, I reached out to Yogi Bhajan, and when he was still living, he was very sick at the time. But I reached out to him and wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back and gave me the name Simrit, because I said my name is.
And what does Simrit mean?
Simrit means the one that has mastered the practice of remembering God's name with each breath.
Wow.
It's
That's
really
right on.
powerful.
I know, and right on. Yeah. I did the same thing, by the way. Again, sorry to interrupt, but just to touch, I want to touch where we have a lot in common. I did the same thing, and he sent me my name back, and it's Nirbe, and it's like Nirbe.
Yes,
which I have as a tattoo on me. And I also have a tattoo of my favorite Byzantine music of this, song that I love, a Byzantine psalm. But anyway, so Nirbe means fearless. And it's actually so rare because, all the names that I've known of friends of mine are long. The meaning in English tends to be a sentence or sometimes a complicated sentence.
Right.
But this is just one word. And
Fearless.
again, very apropos.
Yes, I love it very much. I love it. I have
He's so right on with his names. I mean, I left my, I left
so
Greece
right on.
when I was 15 and came to America alone. And Enough said, fearless. It's like,
yes, exactly.
He knows it.
Yeah, he knows it. He knows it, and not only that, he also studied Vedic astrology and all these things. Like it felt. I tell you, when I got the name, I was in college again. I was sitting at a computer. I got the letter in the mail. I pulled the letter out and I read it. And
I have my letter in a special
it's beautiful.
Place. I know.
Well, as soon as when I first started practicing Kundalini yoga, I was like, I don't need the name, whatever. But then I was curious. I was like, I'm just curious. So when I wrote him out of quote unquote curiosity, I think he tuned into my deeper self, and he sent me the name. And as soon as I opened that letter and saw the name, I said, this is what I'm going to introduce myself as from now on. I don't know why, but it just felt right. It was, as soon as I got that name, it just felt right to me. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. I didn't think I needed a new name. I loved Stavrula. I loved Stephanie. I didn't need to, I wasn't searching for a new name. I was just curious, but I really went with my intuition on it, and I adopted the name basically and started going by that. Except for with my, my family, of course, they all call me Stavrula, Stephanie, whatever.
Well, he reveals what he does is with the naming is he reveals your destiny. So if you are open, and conscious, it's amazing. It kind of gives you that clarity. That, in this daily life, we are so overwhelmed with like busyness and, distractions, and we don't have that clarity on our own. But he, of course, could see.
It's so beautiful.
So beautiful. I just wish everybody would, have access or allow themselves access, because it's all available to us, and it's so enlightening and liberating and soothing. It frees you from like anxiety and fear. Speaking of fearlessness.
Yes, indeed.
So
indeed.
Okay, so your narrative. So you recorded 3 albums. You were raising your son. You had your son relatively early, right?
Yeah, I had him in my early 20s.
Okay. And,
I had him in my early 20s, and I recorded 2 albums in 3 years.
Okay.
And I did not promote those albums at all. All I did was I had them like at summer solstice, where a lot of Kundalini yogis gather, and I would just sell them at summer solstice. Or the first album, I was just even giving it away. I was like, here, I made some music, and people were really excited because I had been singing at solstices, and they had heard me sing, and I hadn't sung much, but they had heard me, and they were really like, you should make this album. And that was really the impetus for me making the first album, was getting a lot of requests from the Kundalini Yoga community.
That's also beautiful, I must say. It's so beautiful that it's not like ego-driven, I mean, I understand the American thing, Lady Gaga is like the consummate practitioner of this thing. It's like, you can do whatever you want to do if you want it badly enough. But it's still like, I, ego, fame. I mean, I think that there is an undue worship and admiration of fame, which is a very, worldly and false god. So it's nice that you did not, always dream of like being on every every ad and being famous.
No, it's
just
very organic
right.
process.
It's beautiful.
Well, thank
it's
you.
Lovely.
And I truly believe that Yogi Bhajan, who is, I believe that he really put me in this place, and my ancestors, I really believe that the spirit of my ancestors and Yogi Bhajan, worked together to make this happen, because otherwise I don't think, it was my destiny, but I wasn't aware of that growing up. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was.
So when did the discovery happen? When did you move out of the Kundalini community?
After my second album that I put out, I started having people talk to me and be like, look, you clearly have this gift and you really need to start, like, you should tour. You should start marketing yourself, like really put yourself out there. You really have something. And and I was like, okay. And then, but they would be like, no, seriously, like this is really good. It's helping a lot of people. People, you know, there were a few people in my life that were talking with me about it on a regular basis in the community that were really encouraging me because of what they felt when I would sing. And I started to like look at it differently and be like, maybe there is something to it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just have to have someone outside of yourself showing you something that's obvious that you're not looking at. And so I had a couple of main people doing that. They're just talking with me about it on a consistent basis, a couple of friends. And then I started looking at it differently. I started saying, well, maybe I should put it out there. I mean, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should just try doing this. And, you know, from 2004, basically the end of 2013 was when I really decided I'm going to go for this. I'm going to really put myself out there. And I'm not committed to staying in a box. I'm committed to doing whatever flows through me. And this is what was flowing through me. And I love the mantras, and I'll always play mantras, but I do them in such a different way. And I'm always going to honor how it comes through me. But I'm also going to write other songs too, and that's what I do. I write music, you know, and whether it's mantras or not, it always has that energy. It always has that mantric energy in it.
Yeah, that's what I feel too. Yeah, and that's what's beautiful. And you have to write other things so that your audience expands and you bring them into mantra music through another portal, you know.
Right. So yeah, exactly. And that's not my goal. Like, I'm not trying to do that, but that's what's happening now. Is like the audience is so diverse. The age is there's so many different, the age gap. There is no age gap. There's just so much diversity in people's ages at the concert, ethnicities, in their lives, like what they do in their lives. It's not all yogis coming to these concerts, but all these people are being exposed to indirectly, you know, exposed to this, you know, through these concerts. And it's not like I'm trying to do that. It just is happening because I'm following my heart and my intuition, and I'm not trying to just stay in a box. I'm doing what comes through me. So if it came through me to do all mantras, I would do all mantras. Or if it's coming through me to write these other songs, I'm going to write these other songs. And so I just go with what is coming through me, moving through me, and do my best to honor that. And that's what's been happening the past 5 years. And it's really grown. And I would have had no idea growing up that it was going to turn into this. You know.
Did you have like a moment where you felt a breakthrough had happened in your career, in your access to?
I think probably last year or 2 years ago, I started noticing the audience sizes were growing. 2 years ago, I really noticed it, and then last year it made even a bigger leap.
Yeah.
So, like in some cities, we're playing to, you know, larger crowds. And in other cities, we're playing to large crowds, but they're not as large as other cities. But that's because we're playing in a bigger city or something. But, you know, it's, I would say these past 2 years have really taken a leap, and especially last year. I mean, it's growing so organically already on its own. And like I tell people, you know, this thing has legs of its own. It's its own entity, and I'm here to serve that. And that's you know
great.
What I mean? I'm here to serve the mission or the energy or whatever you want to call it.
And how old is your son now?
He is 13 right now. So it's pretty amazing. He's such a sweetheart, and he's extremely musical, and he's got an incredible voice. He has what we call a There's something that singers really revere. It's called perfect pitch, and he has that naturally. But he's still, he kind of reminds me of myself when I was his age. He has no desire to be like a musician, a well-known musician by any means, and he just loves to play music, and he's studying guitar. He's been studying guitar for about 3.5 years now, and he loves it. He loves playing guitar. He's got a wonderful teacher here, and he'll sing sometimes, in guitar lessons and with me, but he's pretty shy about it. So he's a really introverted
so
person.
He's an artist. He has to decide how to,
Yeah, he's definitely an artist, and he's extremely introverted. And I vacillate between both. I can be very extroverted, and I can also be very introverted. He's always really introverted, and it's beautiful. He's a really beautiful human being, but he doesn't have this fire in him that's I'm going to be this famous musician, or I'm going to be the best guitar player out there. He's just really says, I just play guitar because I really enjoy it. And I'm well, that's great. That's all you need, and right. I don't have any desire for him to be some big musician or anything. Unless he really wants to, then I would totally support that, but I don't.
Well, there's time. There's plenty of time.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So how much out of the year do you tour now?
Currently, I tour about 4 months out of the year total. So we do 3 full month-long tours. And then with workshops and immersions, I work with my husband, Jaidev. He teaches Kundalini yoga, and my band and I will play live music for, he does 2 immersions a year that are 5 days long of Kundalini yoga and Ayurveda, and we play live music in his classes in the immersions, which are really, really amazing. So we do that, and then we also travel to Maui every spring, and we're there for a week. We have an immersion there. And then with just, workshops and things like that throughout the year, every once in a while we'll play a handful of workshops with him. So I would say total for our work, I would say 4 months of music touring total, including the immersion. And then here and there, I might do some things, I do other things like recording and things like that. And, but yeah, it's a lot of touring, but I really love it. Yeah. I love it. And it's not all at once. It's a month at a time here, and then a month there, and then in the fall a month there. So
that's good. Yeah. Yeah,
it's spaced out. So I'm home, I would say 7 to 8 months of the year, which feels really good. Which feels really, really good.
Yeah, but that's great. Yeah. So
and I want to be with my son.
Have you given concerts in Greece?
I played 2 years ago in Greece we did a very small intimate concert on Paros for some people that wanted to hire us for that. So we did it was more like a
private concert.
It was a private concert. But I haven't played a big concert in Greece yet. But I'm open to that, and I definitely...
we have to organize something.
Yes, that would be so awesome. Yeah. And my biological mother is oh, you should play here. It would be so fun. And
where does she live now? She's still in Athens?
She lives in Athens. Okay. She also lives in Athens.
The myth of the musician who sings so beautifully that, the sun darkens and the rocks are melting and everything in the world stops growing. He's the god of vegetation or demigod. So he travels to the underworld, and Persephone says that he can have his love back, and she's going to be the only mortal who gets a second life. So it's kind of like a Christian myth, she gets resurrected from the dead, and he's able to go in and out of the underworld, and that makes him a mystic and a prophet and all of that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
It is an
especially
amazing
about
story.
right? Especially about the nature of music, I feel, the nature of music to overcome death and overcome mortality and overcome our limitations, right? Because it's prelingual. It's like before man-made language and logos, really. So I don't know. I think it's an amazing story. And then, of course, at the last minute, he looks back. So she doesn't, get to live again. But that's okay because it's patriarchy. Like, and like patriarchy. Right. Right. Exactly. So like, I think that if it had been matriarchy, then she would come back. And you feel, I think that, you're definitely a role model, but are you conscious of it? Are you aware of it in any way, that you are a woman who is doing something that's empowering and kind of like speaking an ancient language, to modern men. So I hope that it's, it's part of your conscious mission. But that's what I see, and that's what I love. So I have to share it. Well, this is wonderful. I don't know if you want to add anything. I'm pretty good. I feel like we said a lot about your career, and I love the music. I'm gonna play some. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Simrit, for being with us for this hour. And thank you, everyone, for trusting me as your sex whisperer. I am grateful for my audience and start speaking sex and smashing the patriarchy. I'll be back next week. And until then, speak sex. We're going to close today's episode with a couple of minutes of Simrit's music. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, look for her on Spotify and all your other music sources. Simrit Kaur. Ciao.
Can't be
make love incessantly, I would be God.